Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the 2025 HIMSS Global Conference. And I am personally so excited to have these two gentlemen here on our podcast, joint podcast today. These are two of the industry, but probably most recognized healthcare IT leaders. They've been longtime mentors and colleagues and friends of mine as well. And believe it or not, we're not going to be talking about IT, which I'm excited about too. We're actually going to be talking about the patient and the patient journey. And let me introduce Chris Ross, CIO at Mayo Clinic, Ed Marks, former CIO for Cleveland Clinic, and just amazing individual and healthcare technology advisor and transformation leader as well. And we're actually going to be talking about their own patient journeys and the things they've experienced as cancer survivors and insiders into healthcare, and the recent book that they wrote that we'll be discussing as well, called Diagnosis. So let's get started.
Yeah, it is really awesome having you two. And it was really great, inspiring the first day, Sunday, that's the pre-HIMSS. I was just the Executive Leader Summit, just pumped up with everything you were doing. So glad you're here. And where do we go? Where do we start from here?
Yeah, well, let's talk about a little bit of your background for those who have been in a cave for the past 30 years, about who you are, what you've done, and then more importantly, your personal stories and patient journeys.
So I've been involved in healthcare since about 2003. I came into it by accident when a friend said, "Come work for me at United Health," and I said I really didn't want to do that. He said, "Yeah, I know. Come interview anyway." I'm really glad I did. CIO behavioral health part of the United Health Group. Then helped create Minute Clinic, basic healthcare in a drugstore.
Absolutely.
Worked at SureScripts, trying to create interoperability of health data around different places. And I just finished a 12-year run as CIO at Mayo Clinic. I've just retired from that.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah,
Good.
yeah.
Congratulations.
Late breaking news.
Oh, wow. Well, hot off the press.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
And as former chair of the board of HIMSS, I've been involved in a bunch of stuff.
Absolutely.
And
Cancer survivor.
cancer survivor 2 times.
Yeah, 2 times.
Yeah.
But that's it. That's the limit. It's just 2 times.
That's it.
There's no more.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. So for me, thank you for having me as
Oh,
well,
thank
and
you
I've
for coming.
always loved being with my, I've a couple of my besties actually, both of you. And I started off my healthcare career as a janitor when I was 16 years old in a medical facility, and I just knew, I had a Sony Walkman back in the day, listening to Black Sabbath and AC/DC, but something spoke to my heart, like healthcare, but I couldn't articulate it as a teenager, But when I had an opportunity to join the Army Reserve to make some money for college, I saw I could be a combat medic, and so that kind of fit into everything, and so that led into, oh my gosh, I really do love healthcare, but I still couldn't figure out what it was. But fast forward a few more years, I was serving in healthcare and strategy, and had an opportunity to intermix with the IT division, and something amazing happened where I saw the power of IT save someone's life. And when that happened, I was like, oh, I know what my calling is.
Right.
It's IT leadership. So from there I went on, and I was very fortunate to be a CIO of a few different health systems. And then I went to what they call the dark side sometimes, the vendor side, but
right.
I was like, no, it's not the dark side.
That's
It's you have to have this
It's a
partnership,
partnership.
right? To really get next level for digital transformation. And so I served there for 4 or 5 years. And then recently I went on my own, sort of independent, and I serve on a couple hospital boards. And one of my favorite things to do though is write, and Chris and I have written a couple books together already, so I just love doing that.
Thank you, Ed. Well, both of these gentlemen, again, are cancer survivors, and they had, I guess they were sitting around one day having coffee or whatever and said, hey, we need to think about the patient experience. We both have had our own personal experiences as insiders in the industry, and I don't want to tell your story, how frustrating it might have been. In fact, I'm going to stop there and just let you tell your stories. What prompted you to write? We were hoping to have one of their books, their books here, but they've sold out.
Yeah. Sold out.
So I'm going to show an image of it. It's called Diagnosis. Diagnosed.
Yeah, and it's actually going on its second printing.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so we're getting ready
Congratulations.
for second printing, yeah. Very
Yes.
cool.
So tell us what inspired you to write the book.
Well, so the book was Ed's idea.
Right.
I'm speaking first because it was his
Right.
idea. And we actually gave a talk, I think, with another colleague who was a cancer survivor. And people appreciated hearing what it was like from an insider, where supposedly we understand how everything works,
Right.
how difficult it was. And we started writing a book for our peers in the industry because it's just different when you're lying on an operating
Yeah.
Yes, it
table
is.
looking up at the ceiling, and as opposed to observing a patient. So we started writing a book for the industry. I got cancer a second time mid-course, and our publisher said, "We really like the book. We like the way you guys write, whatever. But we think that patients need to hear your story more than your peers and colleagues."
Right.
And we had to do a bunch of rewrite and whatever. But I'm really glad
Yeah,
they
I am
pushed
too.
us in that direction.
Yeah.
That's
It's
right.
really smart.
Yeah, and Christopher, I know you can relate as well.
Yeah.
And we've all talked about that before as well with your cancer story, so you know exactly where we're coming from. Yeah, and I love the editor came up with that idea to rewrite for the public, and basically it's like a hand they can hold through their healthcare journey. You know, not everyone is as fortunate as we all are, and probably many of the viewers and listeners who are in healthcare, so we kind of know. But even though we kind of knew, and we
Right.
were at these preeminent organizations, it was still hard as heck.
Yeah.
And we're like, man, imagine if it's hard for us, how hard is it for people who don't have someone like us in their lives who's in healthcare, sort of has that insider knowledge. So that's what the book is all about. It's like I said, a hand they can hold in their healthcare journey.
When I hear what you're doing, I think hope. Hope is the most important thing that we need
Yeah.
as people and patients.
Yeah.
So I feel like, the fact that you were then taking it another level, not just doing leadership rounds, bringing it to the democratic, just trying to democratize
Yeah.
your message. What did you see or feel resonating with what you guys experienced?
So I think it might be useful, Michael, just sort of the framework that we used with the book was we did a lot of soul searching, and we're hoping that this is a book that will land in people's hands when they've just gotten diagnosed or someone close to them has been diagnosed, right? And there's some quick start guides at the beginning, and hopefully that's good. And then we just told our stories as kind of brutally honestly as we could, because I think you get a sense of empathy and credibility
Exactly. Absolutely.
if you can tell your story. So we did that. But the framework, and I'll sort of describe it and then I can go deep, is, first lesson is you got to own your own journey. And that nobody's
right.
going to walk it for you.
That's right.
You've got to walk it and you got to own it. And a lot of people are just so overwhelmed. They don't know what to do. They're just responding to all these signals that are around them.
Mhm.
And they're terrified, disoriented, frightened, whatever it might be. So that. And the second piece is, you really deserve to have companions with you. You need to have a village
The support system.
to come
Exactly.
along with you. And then we talk about selection of care team and how do you relate to your community as a whole. Well, I
Yeah.
think the biggest thing, Ed, and this really comes from you again, is just you got to own your own journey,
Yeah.
and you got to have a village.
Yeah, and what was great writing with Chris is you get multiple perspectives. Sometimes you get a book or a theory and you might not relate to that person because maybe they're like super extroverted
Sure.
and you're introverted. So you're like, that's probably good ideas, but it's not me, I can't do that. But Chris and I are different enough
Yeah.
Mhm.
that
Right.
that you get both tracks. So
Right,
that's
right.
why we spend the first couple chapters telling our story, very brutally honest, so anyone could relate to us. It was pretty nasty stuff that we both went through. But then Chris kind of shares like some of the things that worked for him, and I share mine, and they're different. And I think that we'll be able to relate to a lot of different people. But at the same time, we also realized
Mhm.
that we were two middle-aged white guys,
All right.
and that's not going to relate to everyone either. So in the book, we did a lot of research, and we had a lot of focus groups,
All right.
and we spoke to people from every possible combination of backgrounds and things like that, and we let their voices come through as well. So we highlight a few of them in the book. So they're people not like us, and they share their journey and how
Right.
they handled it.
Exactly.
I'm curious, where was the spouse or significant other, the caregiver? Because my father, he has dementia, and I just had a really a heart-wrenching conversation with my mother because the isolation that she's had just these last few years, I'm curious, did any of that come up in your journey with customers, the other family member?
Yeah. Yeah, well, first, I'm sorry, about that situation. That's very, very tough and hard for your mother as well. We do acknowledge we call it the village,
Okay.
basically, where you can't do this alone. We don't recommend anyone
Right,
doing this
right,
alone.
right.
We need other people.
Yeah.
And so we give, again, two different ideas about how you would engage the village. And it's not always your spouse. And that's one thing we really stress. You
Sure.
think it's your family, but you might be surprised it's not. So you really should think about these things beforehand. But ideally, yes, if you're married, your spouse is engaged. And so we actually brought in the perspectives. For Cris, the primary caregiver was daughter.
Yep.
Right.
For me, it was my wife.
Okay.
And so their voices are also in the book. Their
Exactly.
perspective is in there. And we think it's very important, but not only cultivating, your kids and your spouse, but also your broader village, which
Right.
we describe most times it may not be your family.
Mhm.
So it might be the guys that you go bowling with. It might be your fraternal order, or my wife has a club called the 5'2" Club. It's all these women that are 5'2" that she hangs out with and has breakfast with. That's her little village. So
Exactly.
it's a little different for everyone, but we give some ideas about how to incorporate that.
Absolutely. I'm curious from your perspective, obviously being insiders and folks who have some level of influence within the healthcare system, what was one of the most frustrating things you had to deal with as you navigated your health journeys?
Well, I expected perfection.
Right.
I belong to a health system, and there's nothing negative.
Right.
This happens.
And I didn't
in
mean negative, but just
Right.
frustrating, right? Right.
This happens across any
Right.
hospital.
Right.
So no matter if you're in a top 10 or
Right,
whatever.
right.
But there were gaps that happened. It was very frustrating. In one situation, I was in the recovery room, and normally the spouse or significant other comes in, and they didn't allow that. And so that caused a lot of fear in my wife, like, why can't I go in?
Right.
And it turned out it was a newer nurse and she didn't understand the policies. Then they had transferred me, but they couldn't find where I was transferred to.
Oh, wow.
It was like an hour.
Right.
I was already awake and
Right.
waiting to see my wife, after this traumatic surgery, and it took an hour to find me. It was a little frustrating, but here was the funny part, if I could expand on the story a little bit. We do rounds, like most hospitals,
Right.
the executives, we do rounds. It turns out the rounding that happened was the next morning, and it turned out that my room was randomly selected.
Oh, wow.
And so here come my peers into the room,
Uh-huh.
and they knew I was having surgery and
Right.
stuff, but they didn't know, when and where and all that kind of stuff. They were like a little bit shocked, but I was able to tell them that story directly.
Right.
And it's like, man, we got to fix some of these gaps. So that was a little frustrating, but that's why, again, the motivation behind the book was like, we know this occurs everywhere.
Right.
And so we need to really work on empowering the patient so that they're better prepared to have a good experience despite the hospital.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I tell a little anecdote in the book about a situation where I was a mess. And I had this thing, nasal gastric tube, they put down your nose and it's blah, blah, blah. And it's nasty to put in. And a resident arrived
Right.
on Sunday and said, it's time to take out the tube. And I was like, I'm not sure,
Right.
because I don't want to go.
Do this again. Exactly.
So explain to me why I need to have this done. And
Right.
it goes, well, the tube does, and it's like, okay, I get it, thank you, but stop talking to
Right.
me like I'm an eighth grader.
Right.
Just give it to me.
Exactly.
And she was clearly frustrated because I wasn't following orders. I was frustrated because I didn't think she was listening to me.
Sure.
And it all turned out fine. And my surgeon was great about it.
Right.
We resolved the whole thing. But you have to advocate for yourself.
Yeah.
And Michael, we were talking earlier. I think a lot of people think of healthcare like, well, let's make it like Amazon.
Right.
Just simple, easy. But I think a healthcare journey is more like a backpacking trip to the Himalayas.
Sure.
And you're going to have a bus that you're going to miss, and you're going to get food poisoning, and a taxi driver's going to try and steal your money.
Right.
That's just the way it is.
Right.
And we
It is what
might
it
say,
is.
well, that shouldn't happen, right? But until the world is perfect,
Right.
when you're going through a complex things are going to break.
Exactly.
So I think probably the places where I was the most frustrated was when someone didn't take care of it for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I had to wait, stop.
Right.
And it's just because you're at your worst. And I
Yes.
tried to be a good patient and all that, but sometimes your emotions.
Of course, you're still human. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. You understand the system, but you're the patient now. And,
stop.
exactly. Absolutely.
I feel like this book you have, is there a next with it? I mean, it seems like there's so much
Yeah.
operational insight to make healthcare better. And maybe I should just let the book come out, the second edition, but it's just, you are two people that can really are making such an impact and made an impact in healthcare. and I'll just stop.
Yeah. Well, one thing Chris and I did do, we learned a lot through this process, and as I was alluding to, we did focus groups with patients, but we also did a lot of focus groups. I want to say 100, but I don't want to exaggerate, but it
Yeah,
was
a
a
lot.
lot.
It was
It was a lot.
Yeah, yeah.
And so we met with a lot of different people, got a lot of great ideas. So we actually did publish a smaller, we call it a booklet, and it's for healthcare people. And there's 5 things that we found were like best practice. And the beautiful thing about them is 4 of them are free. And it really requires just leadership
Right,
and
right.
fortitude. So, some of them are, one of them is tech, how to use tech to enable better experiences.
Sure.
But 4 of them, anyone, I always tell you, as long as, if you're a manager above, you can read this book and make change in your organization.
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
My last question, and it's not necessarily related to the book, but about the conference itself. I mean, you guys have
Yeah.
been around HIMSS just as long as I have, What were you expecting from this year's HIMSS? What did you get that was unexpected? So I'll just leave it at that. Yeah. What were you expecting?
Well, I expected that everyone was going to include AI.
Right,
And
right,
I'm
right.
pleased with the fact that none of us have said the word AI. during
Right,
this whole podcast,
right.
So thank you.
You're
for
very
that.
welcome.
That was a really good
You're
thing.
very welcome.
No, look, I think that it's really important for us to get together.
Mhm.
And the power of learning from each other
Exactly.
and making connections with other people that you can, pick up a phone or
Right.
get on a Zoom call,
Sure.
talk to somebody when you have a moment of need. I think it's just irreplaceable
Right.
to have these kinds of things. So I'm really glad the fact that persists strongly. I'll put in a little bit of a plug. I've been really involved in the international community a lot. As
Exactly.
part of my board service
Sure.
with HIMSS and so on. The international presence here is really strong.
Yeah,
this
it
year.
really
Yeah.
is. We had the chief marketing officer on earlier. We interviewed her, and just the focus that HIMSS is now
Yep.
doing on the international level is
And we can all learn
So
from
you
each
should
other
be
so
applauded,
much.
yeah, for your
people
leadership
think
there.
that healthcare is different in
Right,
other countries, and
right.
it's more the same than it is different.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What I really appreciated, and I think it's the first year,
Mhm.
there was a Connect program, not the CIO Connect, which is
Mhm,
great as well.
Right.
So training the next generation of healthcare tech leaders. That's been going on for a couple of years.
Mhm.
But it's a connection program and it's new here, to help younger people in their career. So not necessarily to CIO, but maybe they're an analyst
Right.
to manager. So there's some training, like every half hour, there's a different speaker that's been around a while, sort of
Mhm.
giving some of their insights. And then they did their own, someone will look at your LinkedIn
Right.
for you, someone will look at your resume, you can get a professional headshot. So it's
Exactly.
like this part
I
of
like
the
that.
exhibition here where you could walk in there, spend half a day and have a great LinkedIn, have a
Right.
great resume, have a new headshot, learn from some tenured speakers, and then there was even like a poster educational session as well.
Yeah, it was
That's
crazy.
powerful,
I walked
yes.
in there because Ed was
Right.
one of the guys giving the
Right,
talk,
right,
So
right.
I walked down there and I didn't know what to expect. And it's like this boiler room.
Yeah.
There's like
really?
50 or 60 people waiting in line
Sure.
to get a professional headshot, and then there's people sitting in individual booths
Yeah.
coaching.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
Their profile,
Oh, wow,
whatever.
that's
I
powerful.
thought it was
I didn't realize they
awesome.
were doing
Ed
that.
gets up and he gives this unbelievable, powerful speech, and I'm like, I got it. I need a purpose statement, and I need to do an annual retreat for myself. Those are my
Right.
2 takeaways about what I want to get out of it. And you're absolutely right, because I guess if you come to this from year after
Right,
year,
right.
maybe you get sort of jaded.
Yeah, yeah,
whatever, 'cause
exactly.
you've been
Right.
here. But you see these people who are 30 years old, or
Exact-
25 years
absolutely.
old, and their eyes are open,
Yeah.
Yes.
and they're going to do better than we did.
That's right.
So where's the annual retreat? Nepal, or where are we going?
Be surprised. They've been to a few interesting places.
Well, I don't know if I want to go with Chris because you were describing the journey earlier and all the
That's
Right.
But yeah, you could do the retreat in your home if you
Yeah,
need
exactly.
to.
Right,
Yeah, that's all
right.
I'm doing.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you shared that. We were talking again to the CMO earlier for HIMSS, and one of the things that I noticed was the youth.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
number of young people who
Yeah.
are here
Yeah.
versus in the past.
Yeah.
It was all us,
Yeah,
us
right.
old fogies, doing our stuff. And that's exciting and promising that we're seeing the torch now being
Love it.
passed
Yes.
and allowing that group to take on the mantle and drive the future of healthcare.
So I think about
Yeah.
it. I just had a conversation with everybody knows John Glass.
Yeah, right, exactly.
John is a
legend.
tight,
Absolutely.
and I've learned so much from it.
Right.
And he's moving into a little bit more inactive stage.
Right,
and he's
right.
been public about that. And I left my thing at Mayo. Now I think we are seeing a generation step away.
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
we're seeing better people.
Right, absolutely. Well,
Yeah.
and it comes on the backs of, folks like yourselves who have been transformational leaders from day one. And I'm just going to say, I remember the day I went to the first CIO boot camp, and this man was my mentor, and he got up and talked about how he was as a CIO. And I was like, I want to be like him.
Right.
I mean, he
Very
was
kind.
not the typical, no, I'm not blowing smoke. You were not the typical CIO. And I was like, I'm going to be like him when I grow up.
And I learned from John Glasser.
Yeah,
to your
yeah,
point, he was
yeah.
my boot camp
Yeah,
instructor. Yeah, and
Yeah.
if we all do our job right,
Right,
the next
right.
generation should better be better.
absolutely.
And if they're
That's
not, it's
right.
our fault.
Totally.
So,
Exactly,
I'm
exactly.
very encouraged.
I want to make sure we get a plug for the book and where they can, where people can find it.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we would love everyone to have a copy of Diagnosed. And the companion booklet I mentioned
There
is
you go.
called Patient Experience. And you can get it, probably the easiest place is Amazon. So you can go there. And you can also go to Mayo Clinic Press,
Barnes and Noble.
Barnes & Noble. The most beautiful thing about it is that all the author royalties go to cure cancer.
That's great.
So you're making an investment for cure for cancer. So love for you to buy it. The more the merrier.
Yeah, I hope people buy it for a friend.
Yes.
Somebody who's in need. That's who we want to claim.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, gentlemen, for taking
you.
time with your
Yeah,
busy
thank you
schedule.
for having
Thank
us.
you.
You know I love you guys.
It's an honor.
Absolutely. No,
Honor to be
absolutely. Good to see you,
Thank
man.
you.
Thank you.
All right.